Not seldom, I'm asked, what is philosophy? And at first glance, I feel somewhat baffled because I feel like St. Augustine, when asked, what is time? He knew what time was, but explaining it was something different. But after some consideration, it isn't all that difficult to provide an answer. And let's start with three common sense answers. What is philosophy? The first answer might be something like a tear off calendar. Every day you tear off one page with an anecdote about a philosopher, about a saying about a philosopher, etc. It's enjoyable, but what does it add to the knowledge of philosophy? It's a mystery to me. Secondly, and here I need some more explanation. Take a newborn child. A newborn child, as soon as it is in the world, it is getting enrobed with meanings, customs, rules, regulations, frames of reference, scenarios, things you need to do that way, etc. So, at a certain moment, it opens its eyes and it sees a world already full with meaning. And it takes that meaning for granted. It is the world. The world is like this. That's the world. But it is a bit like romantic love. When you get in love with someone, the first time, the first years, the other one is enrobed in an atmosphere of magic. It thrills, it excites. You're getting touched every time you're getting connected to the other. But there comes a moment, takes some years, there comes a moment that getting up in the morning and going to breakfast, you suddenly see someone else on the other side of the table. The pharmacon, the enchantment, seems to be gone at that time, at that moment. So you're confronted with a brutal way of reality, a brutal picture of reality. Now the same is with, we return to the child, and the same is going on with the child, oftenly not earlier than 30. One day, the world it took for granted seems to have lost its magic, its self-evidentness, and questions start to come up. What is this world? And I will read you a short passage from a book on philosophy, an introductory book on philosophy. It's in Dutch, so I will translate on the fly. The sketched profile of philosophy learns that philosophy, in first instance, is a reflective activity, focusing by preference on things, on events which normally are not questioned. So that's exactly what I said. One day the world has lost his magic, his self-evident naturality. Now, there is a third common sense interpretation. What do academic trained philosophers do? Well, most of the time they study books, texts written by other philosophers in history, so to find out what interpretation have been given in the past. And eventually, some of them also produce new ideas. So, in short, I have given three versions: the humoristic, the breaking of the self-evidence, this atmosphere of self-evidence, the experience of self-evidence, and thirdly, the activity of academic trained philosophers. But let's take another turn. Let's take another approach. Suppose now, forget philosophy for a minute, suppose now you find in front of you 3 pieces of cake. A fruit cake, a cream cake, and a rice cake. And you are asked, what do you prefer? What taste does pleasure you the most? Now, the same is going on with philosophy. You read different authors, different books, and you are asked, what do you think? What is pleasing you most? What is fitting most? What is connecting best with your own intuitions? That's one way, that's one fundamental way of approaching philosophy. But there is another way. Suppose you're a Martian, you're an extraterrestrial, a little green man, and you find in front of you 3 lumps of something, not identifiable. And you ask, as a Martian, as a little green man, you ask yourself, what could the function of those lumps be for a terrestrial? Projected on our situation in philosophy, we could now ask the question, philosophy, not what is it, but what is the use of it? What is the function of philosophy? I will now elaborate somewhat on that question. What is the function of philosophy? Therefore, we start with the observation of Darwin, at least when taking his theory of evolution into consideration, and also what he mentioned in the 2nd chapter of The Origin of Species. Man is an animal. Man is an animal amongst other animals. Primary an animal amongst other animals. Also in biology, this conviction is alive in all the texts, in all the studies on the last common ancestor, for instance. And even Richard Leakey is putting it more boldly that man is the 5th ape. Full stop. That's a starting position. But what is of interest to us is, what are the conditions man shared with these animals most akin? And that is that an animal is bound to the situation at hand. He's rooted in the actuality. Actuality being as well in time as in space. It's local, it's the situation at hand at that very moment. He is confined to the actual and the local. He's enclosed in it, while actually enclosed is not a very good word, because in being enclosed has a complement, being not enclosed. And that's not the case here. The enclosement is the only situation at hand. So, the animal, man, at that moment, is bound to the situation. However, there has been the line developing into man, evaluating into man, has followed a particular path. At a certain moment, man lost that condition, which cannot be else than felt as disturbant, because an animal does not worry about what is going on, is not reflecting on the situations, he is not worried. But man, at that very moment, uprooted, lost the ground, or ground lost, and confronted with an openness which is actually a disturbance, is felt as being disturbant. It's disrupting. Now, fortunately, at the same time, it's going hand in hand. At the same time, language offers a way out. Because with language, one can make a story, can give an explanation to what is happening. Animals do not ask for explanations. Animals do. They act. But man has to decide how to act. And for that, he needs a frame of reference. He needs a story giving meaning to what is going on. He's filling in the void with exploratory stories. For instance, when thundering, the animal takes shelter. But man explains, the gods are at war. When raining, the gods are sad. So these stories do not take away the harshness of being alive, of the conditions of being alive. But anyway, it puts events into perspectives, and as such is quieting. Now, this kind of stories, this kind of scenarios, these kinds of discourses is what is called the mythos. So, mythos are stories, needed stories. It are not just so stories, but it are stories with a particular function. They are stories with a function to put everything in place so that one can act in more or less a quiet mood. Now, mythos. Normally, then philosophy starts with and then mythos ended and logos began. What is logos? What is logos? Logos actually is continuing that function. It is the same, it fulfills the same function as the mythos. It is giving a story, opening a discourse, opening a scenario in which everything has its place, but with a difference. While for the mythos there were only extra natural instances causing the disturbances in life, here now causes are sought on the basis of arguments, on discursive reasoning. Of course, it didn't happen from one day to another. It took a long time. Now, this type of logos, mythos, logos now with the same function as mythos, is actually what began with the Greeks called the philosophers of nature. And nature here is not to understand as the collection of all what lives, all organisms and all conditions, all earthly conditions, but has to be understood in the sense of, if I ask you, what is your character? What is your nature? In the same sense. So what is the character? What is the nature of that what is? So we had mythos followed by logos. Both do the same. They answer, they offer an answer, they offer a story, filling the gap, the void, rising up from being uprooted. Now, this logos, this philosophy of nature, also has its own further evolution, development. For instance, Galilei introduced executed experiments, measured, compared measurements, and on the basis of that made predictions about the results of experiments not yet executed. So here one can see the coming into being of what would be called the scientific method. Now, rounding up. What is logos? What is the philosophy of nature? What is philosophy? What would be called philosophy in the end? That is a particular way of offering an answer, a story, a scenario, a discourse, to fill up the void produced by being uprooted. Why is it particular? Because it is a turn of history which took place in a certain period, 5th, 6th century before Common Era, in a certain region, the Aegean Sea. I mentioned that logos, philosophy of nature, has its own development, which actually is still going on. But there are two moments which the novice should know of in order to understand what philosophy is when reading books on philosophy. And the first is a change in the subject of investigation. And that happened, the first instance is with the Greeks. What were the Greeks interested in? They asked into the nature of the world, into the character of the very essence or the very essence of that what is. They wanted to know what is the most fundamental essence of that what is. The answer sprouted. Earth, fire, air, water, apeiron, quintessence, atoms. You can't think of it. The answers, the possible answers are numerous. So in the end, after many centuries, one started to feel uneasy with all those possible answers, but because what was now the real one? And this led to crisis. Thinking, producing knowledge itself became questioned. What is the character of the knowledge? What is the quality of the knowledge? Can man produce truthful knowledge? The ultimate truth. So you have a difference. In the beginning with the Greeks, they questioned into the nature of the world, the character of the world. So they focused on the object. What is the nature? What is the essence of the object? From late Middle Ages, Renaissance, started to be questioned. The subject changed, and the subject became the knowing instance itself. So there is a change. Now, if one reads, for instance, Plato or Aristotle, this is going about the object. Even if it's going about knowledge, knowledge is the object of which one wants to know what is the most fundamental, what is the core of it. But after around 15th, 16th, 17th century, Descartes, for instance, questions what is the quality of the knowledge produced. Is knowledge giving an accurate picture of the world? Also here, different opinions. For instance, Descartes, just mentioned, saw ratio as the basic ability, while Locke, for instance, fell back on what the senses provided. Hume was then skeptic, and Kant made a water-shedding moment, signified a water-shedding moment when he said that, well, we can't know what's out there, exactly how it is out there. Because what we know is getting framed by the structures of the mind. Right. So, if buying a book, one should know where to situate the author and his opinion and his vision in that period. Is he investigating into the nature of the object, or is he investigating into the nature of the knowing instance? Now, on the second event of importance, I will only mention because it needs a contribution in its own right. The second event of importance is the moment in 1834 where philosophy of nature splits up into philosophy on the one hand, science on the other hand. Time to round up. So on the question, what is philosophy? What is the function, or better still, what is the function of philosophy? The answer was given that it is a particular way of offering an answer, a story, a version, a discourse to the void produced by the condition of being uprooted. Now, whatever book you will read, there will be a lot you will not be understanding. You will not understand. That's not a problem. That's quite common. Studying philosophy is a hard task, I may say. It's iterative. You have to do it. You have to continue. You have to persist in your endeavor to do it. It's a continuous task of interpretation, of consideration. You have to consider again and again and again and again. Unfortunately, it is also a cumulative product, meaning that you're getting better with time. Now, people easily ask me what book they might be reading. And in this case, having in mind someone who knows nothing about philosophy at all, I would advise a complete Idiot's Guide to Philosophy, composed by J. Stevenson, a lecturer or a professor in philosophy at Rutgers University in New Jersey. I think that's a good entrance, a good overview. At the end of the book, there is also a list of books which might be an indication how to continue that project. That's it on the question, what is philosophy? And I hope I have shed light on this problem, which at first glance seems to be quite difficult. Thank you for your attention.